Well, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the U.S. Dry Bean Council's 2022 Dry Bean Harvest webinar. I'm Rebecca Bratter, and I'm the Executive Director of the U.S. Dry Bean Council. I think most of you are familiar with us, but just a quick word about who we are. U.S. Dry Bean Council represents farmers, dealers, and companies who grow, handle, export, and process dry beans grown in the United States. And I know most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with our global staff members in your home country. And I hope that you'll continue to be in regular contact with those folks as well. So on behalf of our full global team and all of our members, I want to thank you for joining us again today for this Harvest webinar. I'm going to be serving as your host. And before we get into the main content, I'm going to start with a few housekeeping items, and then I will just say a few words to set the stage. So if you need tech support, type your question or need into the chat feature, which you should see on the bottom of your screen, and our support team will do their best to resolve your issue. This morning, you're going to be hearing from 4 speakers, and then, as we always do, we'll reserve time at the end for questions. So please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A, also at the bottom of your screen. And we're going to wait to address the questions until the end. So we'll go through all the presentations, and then we will come back to the Q&A at the end. I'm very excited about today. Our fantastic speakers are going to be providing you with key data from this year's dry bean harvest in their respective regions. So before I turn it over to them, I'll just take a few minutes to set the stage with a few thoughts about 2022. I think it goes to say that we've certainly been living through interesting times. We began this webinar series back in 2020 as a way to stay in touch with all of you when we couldn't travel during the pandemic. And happily this year we were able to resume our global trade mission. And I hope some of you that are on this Zoom this morning were able to be here in person in U.S. Dry Bean Country. But even with that mission taking place again, we decided that we would keep this webinar going because it's just a wonderful way to reach so many of you, share harvest information, and it's a chance for us to hear your questions as well. So I think we will likely keep this as a permanent event. I think we all know that last year was pretty tough, but overall we have some good news to share this year. As we know, harvest dynamics can change in line with global dynamics, and we've certainly had a lot of factors to address in these last years. So while I think you'll hear this morning or afternoon, evening, wherever you are, that while there's been some decline in acreage for U.S. dry beans, the yield is up. And so that results in higher production numbers. But I think most importantly, the quality is really outstanding this year. Now, there are certainly dynamics that are going to differ from region to region of dry bean country in line with the specific growing factors and challenges and weather patterns, but I'm going to let our experts get into those details in greater detail this morning. Weather continues to be a challenge. Many of the challenges we faced in the last years continue to be a reality going into this year and beyond. Things that we all know: shipping delays, supply chain disruptions. In some regions of dry bean country, water is becoming an ongoing challenge, as is competition for acres with other crops as well. And I think these are similar challenges that are faced by growers and producers all around the globe, not just in the United States. That said, each year makes us feel like this is the best time to be in the business of beans. And I say that emphatically. Each year that message calls to us a bit stronger. We like to say beans are the answer. And I was very excited, and I'm sure many of you have seen a new project that launched immediately prior to this webinar on the sidelines of the UN Global Climate Change event, COP27, that's focused entirely on increasing consumption of dry beans globally. And as they say it, beans are how. So hopefully everybody will be hearing more about that. You know, I think more and more dry edible beans are just the solution to a hungry planet, to a world looking to eat responsibly and decrease the impact on climate and resources. Dry beans can do so much for our overall health and longevity. More and more research is putting out undisputable clinical data, whether it's Blue Zones, Dr. Greger with Nutrition Facts, United Nations, FAO, et cetera, et cetera. It's also exciting to see beans moving into new areas, new applications, new forms, new flavors. For example, I wonder how many of you have had the chance to try dry bean flour pasta. I know I have. Or what about a crab cake made with dry beans with a panko dry bean flour crust? Have you ever seen a hamburger bun made entirely of dry bean flour? Or what about a chocolate Brazilian cake bite made of bean flour? There's also nutritious bean flour, chocolate, cinnamon, and peanut butter puff snacks. Have any of you tried those? Anyway, it goes on and on. The bottom line is beans are now, beans are exciting, beans are good for you, beans can do it all. And whole beans remain a standard for plant-based diets. And not just that, but they're also a complement, or as we say, a meal extender for meat-based dishes. And, you know, like we say, beans just play well with everyone. So with that said, let's get to it. The world needs beans. We will keep needing more beans to feed a hungry planet. The US will keep providing the highest quality beans with the excellent service that you've all come to know and rely on. And we have never been more excited about the future of beans. So it is really an honor to be here today. We're all excited. Thank you again so much for your interest in US dry beans. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. And I am looking forward to hearing from my colleagues, as I'm sure you are as well, and our experts. And as I noted, we'll leave time at the end for Q&A. So with that said, I'd like to introduce our first speaker today. First, we're going to hear from Joe Kramer. Joe Kramer is the Executive Director of the Michigan Bean Commission. Joe?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Rebecca. I have tried many of those items that you mentioned, and they're fantastic, and I can't wait to see more. So let's talk about Michigan a little bit. Just a little bit of background. In Michigan, we're somewhere around 1,000 dry bean growers, give or take. It depends on the price of soybeans. Once in a while, we go up and down with soybean acres, it seems like, as we compete. We have 26 shippers, we call them, folks who receive beans from growers and clean them up, make them for sure safe, and are logistics experts in most cases. So they do their best to make sure that really high quality beans arrive where they're supposed to at the right time in the right packaging, and they do a great job. Michigan plants, give or take, 210,000 acres annually. This year, USDA tells us we have that we planted 215,000. Those acres in 2022 were divided up into 12 market classes. So those market classes are certainly dominated by black beans. In Michigan, according to FSA, we planted almost 60% of our total acreage last year was black beans, the crop we just harvested. Navy beans are our second biggest class, just under 60,000 acres, followed by small red beans, light red kidney, cranberry, white kidney, and then a few other classes, totaling 3,500 acres. So that's how we sort of break down our total, at least in 2022, and those percentages stay pretty close year in and year out. I think it's important to point out the fact that our acreage is concentrated pretty heavily in 4 counties in the thumb of Michigan, what we call the thumb of Michigan. You can see the green highlighted area. Those 4 counties, the tip of the thumb there, Huron County had 41% of our acres in 2022. Tuscola, Sanilac, and Bay County make up the balance. Certainly we have production in many other counties, but a large percentage is concentrated in those 4. And the next slide will demonstrate why I point that out this year. So many of you that I spoke with, or our people from Michigan spoke with throughout the year, probably mentioned concern about dry weather affecting our yield and potentially our quality. If you remember the last slide, that green shaded area, if you try to lay that into this map, you can see that our acreage base, or at least a large percentage of it, 80+% of it, was in a droughty area. We looked at a lot of beans this summer throughout the growing season, and we were just concerned about pod set, pod fill, and we just weren't very optimistic, especially coming off last year's great yield here in Michigan, where we harvested 2,400 weights per acre, which was or very close to a new record for us here in Michigan. So we didn't think that, given our lack of rainfall, we didn't think that we really had the potential to touch that. We'll zero in on that a little bit more in the next slide. So here's just a little more focus. Huron County is that top county, 41% of our acreage, really in a dry part of the state. Sanilac, Tuscola, Bay County as well, affected by just really lack of rainfall. And again, the impact on that, the timing of that, we had some high temperatures right at flowering, and really honestly made some concern about the potential for our yield. But at the end of the day, given the genetics that we have today, and Rebecca mentioned our sustainability story, it's clear to me that we can produce some really good quality, high yielding beans without a lot of water. I think this is a big story for us to tell as an industry. I think we need to talk about that a lot more than we do, and obviously we're going to. So on this slide, I'm kind of focused on the yield column. USDA in the October 12th report suggested we had a 24 bag yield. I took it upon myself to just survey many of those 26 shippers that we have, talk to the folks who actually dump the trucks when they arrive. They know the growers, they're involved with them with contracts and food safety data, documentation all through the growing season. And I just wanted their opinion. Did they agree with those USDA figures? And this is what I learned. I just averaged them all together. And this is a summary of what they said. So our total acres, according to USDA, are 2,400 pounds per acre, 24 bags. The folks who are dumping the trucks aren't far off from that. They put our highest yielding bean on black beans at 25 bags per acre. So we took the FSA figures, which are a little bit lower than USDA. Remember, I mentioned USDA said we planted 215,000 acres, and I think they said we harvested 213. Not all acres get reported to FSA, but the acres that do get reported, this is what that looks like. So we use this data quite a bit. You can see that in Michigan, we produce just shy of 5 million bags of total beans, and nearly 3 million of that 5 million are black beans. So we've got good volume and excellent quality, as I note in this slide. Rebecca mentioned quality in her open remarks. I think we do have good quality across the country. Certainly Michigan is no different than that. We had really good weather conditions during harvest again this year. The crop came off in great shape. Not much of it had to be mechanically dried. Our harvest seemed to drag on a little bit. So we started probably the very last couple of days of August were some kidney bean harvest, and we ended up probably with black bean and navy bean harvest as we got into October. But everything came in great shape. We probably have some cranberry beans that we think could be a little bit bigger than they are, but we probably always think that. But our inventory is really in excellent shape, both color, seed size. moisture levels, check seed coats, all the things that are important to both canners and packagers. I think we fit the bill very well. And hopefully we don't have super cold weather this winter, but I think most of the guys today most of the processors are equipped to be able to process year round despite cold weather conditions. So we shouldn't have any problems meeting your shipping demands. Go ahead and slip to the next slide, please.
All right. Thank you so much. You know, I was that one slide that Joe put up there, I saw the word excellent and it was highlighted 4 times. So that is the kind of news we like to see. Thank you very much, Joe. It's always really important to hear from the men and women who are out there processing the harvest and have their hands on it and know the ins and outs. So that was excellent. Next, we're going to hear from Mitch Coulter. Mitch is the executive director of North Harvest Bean Growers, and he's going to be covering both North Dakota and Minnesota. Mitch.
Thanks, Rebecca, and welcome everyone. Happy to have you guys on this morning. So I'm going to start with North Dakota. We just want to talk about planted acreage up front. North Dakota dry bean industry saw a loss of about 238,000 planted acres since 2020. In 2020, 815,000 was our high. We did have a wet and cold spring that resulted in a loss of about 29,510 acres to prevent plant. Dry beans accounted for about 1% of North Dakota's total prevent plant acres. Natural disasters accounted for another about 300 lost acres in dry beans. Growing season was exceptional though. We did get heat units and that pushed the crop in a short season. Quality might be as good as it gets. Very similar to what Joe was saying, we have nice size and we have color. Our beans are really nice this year. In North Dakota, pintos are really the mainstay for beans, and we saw increased demand in slow darkening pintos in North Dakota. Slow darkening pintos represent about 41% of the total planted acreage in North Dakota. Price strength, there's a bump for our growers that grow the slow darkening pintos locally. So you see about $2 per hundredweight higher. Slow darkening pintos offer about 4 to 7 times more bioavailable iron. So, you know, if you're a buyer and you're looking for that option, the pintos out of North Dakota are really good. Slow darkening pintos do cook a little bit faster, about 20% faster. So be aware of that as a buyer as well. Buyers are looking for more inclusion of slow darkening pintos into the marketplace. North Dakota yield, really nice yields this year. USDA projects North Dakota at 1,810 pounds per acre. That's up about 780 pounds from last year. That puts North Dakota at just under a 10 million hundredweight crop. That's up about 56% from a year ago. USDA estimates about 550,000 acres harvested in the state. And like Rebecca said, our acreage is down a little bit, production was up. So that's really kind of the story in the numbers this year. But it was really amazing growing conditions for a short growing season. Just want to talk about carryover stocks. This is a 5-year trend. We run the numbers in July. Our carryover stocks from a year ago are about where you want them. You will see a bump in this year's production to add to those numbers. So we're looking forward to some decent pricing to be able to move beans this year. North Dakota top varieties that we identify by our farmer survey for pintos, we see Torreon, La Paz, and Monterey. For black beans, we see Eclipse, Black Tails, and Black Cat. And for Navy, we see HMS Medalist, T9905, and Blizzard. North Dakota Logistics, of course, we saw the Ocean Shipping Reform Act passed into law in June. That has been helpful. Sourcing containers in North Dakota does continue to be complicated. We see a labor shortage for trucking, and making sure dialogue between suppliers and customers, as well as between suppliers and transportation companies, regulators and government officials remains highly important. That's where this Shipping Reform Act in June has improved communications. Freight has been and remains the biggest challenge to the identity preserve supply chain as we fight through some of these logistics issues. North Dakota outlook. North Dakota is very diverse. We see competing commodities becoming a bigger concern for dry edible beans. That's why our acres are down a little bit. We did have 3 brand new crush plants for soybean come into the area. They are in our dry bean heavy planted areas. So value added processing is something of a pressure point in North Dakota. Weed controls and crop protection products are minimal, and that's complicating and kind of giving our farmers a lack of tools. So regulatory action is something that we would like to see more approval of products for our farmers. Joe touched on it. Sustainability is becoming a driving factor in the world markets, and dry edible beans fits as one of the most sustainable crops grown commercially today. So we continue to use that as a driver for dry edible bean marketing. Ingredient markets and value-added opportunities are also driving innovation in North Dakota, and we hope to see acres maybe trend higher as we get more into the innovation of value-added. Plant-based health movement is positive for dry beans. Food aid around the world and school lunch and adult care food programs support the dry edible bean industry. And then the health aspects of eating dry edible beans are undeniable. It's really supportive of our market. We'll touch on Minnesota now. Minnesota dry bean industry saw a loss of about 64,000 planted acres since 2020. 275,000 acres was the high in 2020. Minnesota Farm Service Agency reported in August that Minnesota had 210,560 planted acres in 2022. Only 917 acres lost to prevent plant, and 231 acres reported as failed bean acres for natural disasters. So much different story than what we see in North Dakota. Strong and supportive growing conditions for the 2022 crop. Kidney beans continue to be the driver in Minnesota. Irrigated acres is really appealing to the kidney bean growers. About 40% of our acreage is irrigated for kidney beans. Quality of Minnesota beans remains exceptional, and the irrigated acres really provided a strong crop in 2022. Minnesota yield. USDA projects yields in Minnesota at 2,280 pounds per acre. That's up about 320 pounds. That puts Minnesota at just under a 5 million hundredweight crop, and that's up 2% from a year ago. Minnesota consistency in the dry bean crop is supported with the strong yield. And then I would say the irrigation continues to keep our pounds high in Minnesota. Minnesota stock. We do see dark red and light red kidney beans have a fair amount of carryover supply in the marketplace right now. A lot of that has to do with steel and aluminum retaliatory tariffs and kind of a hangover from that. Broken supply chain over the past year has complicated stocks to use ratio, and the strong US dollar has slowed movement of the dry beans into the export market. Top varieties identified by our farmer survey: kidneys, we see Montcalm, Pink Panther, and Dynasty. From black beans, we see Eclipse, Black Trails, and Zorro. And Navy, we see T9905, HMS Medalist, and Armada. Logistics, a lot of the same issues that we saw on the North Dakota side, trail us in Minnesota as well. The picture shows President Eric Samuelson speaking on behalf of Amy Klobuchar, who was an author, senator from Minnesota, author of the Ocean Shipping Reform Act that was passed in June. Again, sourcing of containers in Minnesota, very much the same as North Dakota, is an issue. Labor shortage, and making sure that dialogue continues is pretty critical. And then freight has been and remains the biggest challenge for identity preserved supply chains in the US. Minnesota outlook, dry bean dealers stay competitive in pricing with conventional crops. Minnesota base acres remains competitive. Dry beans make a great rotational crop and works well to diversify cropping systems in Minnesota. Minnesota is not as diverse on the cropping systems as North Dakota. We have 23 different crops in North Dakota. You see a lot more just corn and soybeans, some sugar beets, a little bit of wheat in Minnesota, but that's primarily it. Kidney bean supply carryover is a concern with complicated logistics, value of the US dollar, and tariff hangover. Freight and supply chain issues continue to hamper the movement of ag products in the Midwest. And Minnesota continues to be a strong dry bean state for production in kidney, navy, and black beans. And our irrigation infrastructure stands out as a strength for Minnesota beans.
All right. Thank you so much, Mitch. I appreciate those insights. I think this story of these pressures on our acreage and the decreased production, but the increased yield is really important and really speaks. It's really a testament to the critical work that's being done by science and agriculture, and how that ties into the work we do, and is a key part of the U.S. dry bean industry, always incorporating the latest science. All right, so thank you, Mitch. And now we're going to move over to hear from Martin Squires of Squires Farms, and also a member of the California Dry Bean Advisory Board. And he's going to talk to us about the dry bean harvest in California. Martin?
Good morning, everybody. I am Martin Squires, and I am a grower in the Central Valley of California. Not only am I a grower, I also do custom harvesting, so where I get to do work for quite a few other growers. And it puts me in a good position to be in contact with the growers and find out what they're doing, what their plans are. I also get to talk with the different warehouses as we deliver product for different growers to the different outfits. And it puts me in a good situation to see, kind of an overview of what all is happening in California. And I was kind of surprised to hear that several of you didn't know that we grew beans in California. So I'm going to try to just give you a little snapshot of what goes on here. We have a wonderful Mediterranean type climate. We can grow just about anything here. Of course, some things do better than others, but as long as we have the water, water is a big issue here in California. As long as we have the water, we can grow just about anything here. We have a wonderful long growing season. We can do 90 to 120 day crops with easily. You can plant early and get 120 days. You can plant late and get 120 days growing season. It's a wonderful climate. We're really blessed to be here. We have several varieties. We have several growing regions. We have, California is just a great place to farm. If we could move on, next slide. We have our 4 main varieties that we use. We can grow other things as well, but these 4 varieties are really our top producers, are the most popular. The large limas, the baby limas, black eyes, and garbanzos. We have several growers that do well with all of these. And I love this picture here, the black eyes. It's a nice, really nice, sharp picture of what we can produce here in California. if we could move on, our growing regions, we have our four main growing regions. If you look to the now kind of the oval there to the north, baby limas, black eyes, garbanzos, cranberries. That's our what I refer to as our northern region. The green area just below that is the northern San Joaquin Valley, and that's where I'm located. My farm, my home is right there about where that A is, see, in San Joaquin. So that's right where I am. We see all the varieties that we grow there. Moving on down to the yellow oval, black eyes and garbanzos. As a custom harvester, I get to go down into that area every now and then and harvest large acreage. And those guys are really, really good black eye growers. Unfortunately, this year they didn't have much of any water to farm with, but normally they can just produce high yields, high quality, just beautiful black eyes. Always fun to go over in that area. And then over on our central coast, we have large limas and garbanzos, also a good growing area as well. If we can move on there. Our crop outlook, we have had really one of our most difficult years ever. I'm 59 years old. I've been involved in farming since I was 12, and this was I think, my toughest year. Between fuel prices and very little water to irrigate with, and long heat spells that just crushed our yields. Just overall, we're just not coming out where we hoped we would be yield wise. But like Joe and Mitch, our quality is excellent. We had some pest pressures, but we have materials to take care of that, and we're able to just deliver just an absolutely beautiful product. I mean, any of the varieties you look at, whether it's the large limas, baby limas, garbanzos, the black eyes, they just, as long as we do a good job taking care of things, they just really turned out well. We're really happy with our quality, how that came out. This slide here was what our estimate was for the dry bean convention in last August. And unfortunately, I think the baby limas came out pretty close to what we had estimated. The baby limas came out good. Large limas were down 15 to 20%. Black eyes were down 15 to 20%, and then I don't have a figure handy for garbanzos, but all of our yields are down. But again, I happily say that our quality is up. We really did well in regards to quality. Every month, the California Dry Bean Advisory Board generates the inventory shipment and movement report. You can contact our office in Dinuba and get on our email list. We can send this to you every month. You can see, what's happening in California, what's coming in, what's being shipped out, and it's all in an effort to kind of keep you informed of what we have, what's available, and what we're low on. But really, the best way is to just give our shippers and handlers, our warehouses, a call, find out what they have on hand. And if there's something that, if you see you like, okay, next year, I would be interested in buying some black eyes. Well, black eyes are pretty general, so we always seem to have a few of those on hand. But call the warehouses, get in contact with them, say that you're interested in buying black eyes, and they will line up. They'll go out and look for growers who will be able to provide the product for you and get everything set up ahead of time, so we know that we can take care of you come harvest time. It's a little bit difficult for us in the spring. We're watching the rainfall real close. We've got to have enough water to finish out our crops. I'm fortunate with black eyes as a black eye grower. If I plant my crop, I irrigate it a few times, and I can take what the plant has provided. And if I run out of water, I can stop right then and just take what's there. But on some of the other varieties, say the large limas or baby limas, they have to have enough water to finish out their crop completely, their number of growing days. So they need to plan for that ahead of time. So we need a heads up as to what you might be looking for, what you'd be interested in. And so contact our warehouses, and they can line up the growers for you for anything you might be interested in receiving from us. So it's kind of a dark picture, but our quality is still up. So we're pretty happy about that. Our outlook for next year, for the 2023 growing season, From what we're hearing, what I'm hearing from growers, I've had a few phone calls. I know our warehouses are getting calls. There's some interest from other crops that didn't do quite as well as they thought they would this last season. And so we were hearing a lot of interest in switching back to beans for the 2023 year. And, you know, prices look pretty good. As long as we have the water to farm with, we should be in good shape. So we're looking to have more beans to provide for you, the buyers, in the 2020, at the end of the 2023 season. We're getting much more post-pandemic interest from overseas as markets are opening back up. We're getting a lot of phone calls, you know, what do you have? What can you provide us with? So, and then also domestic demand seems to be up too, as mentioned before me, Mitch mentioned about the health benefits of eating beans. We're getting a lot of calls. There's a lot of interest in beans right now. They're the hot thing. So with that all in mind, you know, we're trying to be good stewards of the water that we've been given and the ground that we're allowed to farm. And we're trying to do the best we can with all of our resources to provide a good product for the consumers. So as I said before, you know, give our warehouses a call. You can go to the USDVC website and get a list of all of our shippers and handlers, our warehouses. Give them a call, talk to them, find out what we can provide, and let's see what California can do for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. And yes, California is a very critical piece of our dry bean industry in the US. And when you're listening to Martin, keep in mind you're talking directly to a grower. You're talking directly to somebody who's out growing these beautiful beans, these beautiful black eyes and baby limas. So I think that's always very important. So thank you very much, Martin. So now to complete our webinar today and to complete the picture of our 2022 harvest, I'd like to introduce Courtney Schuler. Courtney is the Field Operations Manager with Trinidad Benham, and she's going to be covering Nebraska and also the Rocky Mountain region as well. Courtney?
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here today, and thank you all for joining us. I will kind of finish out the picture for everyone, and we'll start out by just giving you an overview of the region. And the three main states with production in the Rocky Mountain region are Nebraska, Colorado, and Wyoming. And like California, all of the production in this area is irrigated. So we're very dependent upon snowfall in the Rocky Mountains for our surface water irrigation and also groundwater through the Ogallala Aquifer. The top three market classes we produce here are Pintos, Great Northerns, and Light Red Kidneys. And based upon the August 2022 USDA report of those three states, the breakdown on those three classes was 72% Pintos, 14% Great Northerns, 6% Light Red Kidneys, and then 8% of other classes. And those other classes are, you know, maybe some navies, black beans, some pink beans, and so forth. And this year, the Great Northern percentage was a little bit lighter than normal, just because we have had some carryover of that class for a year or so. And so the plantings shifted to some of the other classes this year, just because of prices and that carryover. In that chart, you can notice that in Nebraska and Wyoming, we saw a slight decline in acres from the 2021 year. And Colorado, we saw a slight increase. And for yield, you can see that we had a slight decrease in Nebraska and basically unchanged to a slight increase in Wyoming and Colorado. The Nebraska number, when we see the overall number or the final numbers in January, I think they might come out maybe even a little bit lower than that for 2022, just based on some environmental challenges that we had this year. And I'll touch on those here in a little bit. So as you see, their total production is going to be down slightly in our area, which is different from the North Dakota, Minnesota, and Michigan data you've seen so far today. One other interesting thing here that you can't see from the graph, but I'll note that is similar to the what Mitch was mentioning is that in Nebraska, Wyoming, and Colorado, the planted acres either this year or last year were the lowest planted acres in the last 10 years for this region. So we are seeing a decrease, and that's because of competing crops and some other factors that I'll touch on that as well when we talk about the outlook for 2023. So the 2022 growing season was a big challenge because of a lot of environmental factors, including record-breaking wind, heat, and drought. The map on the top shows the US Drought Monitor that was pulled on October 25th. And our area of Nebraska, Wyoming, and Colorado is, I think the entire state of Nebraska has been in extreme to severe drought through basically the entire growing season, starting back in the spring. So, and I think I was down in a field day in Colorado, in northeastern Colorado, during the midsummer, and someone down there said they had some data from April, and at that weather station there, it was the windiest, or no, it was the second windiest April in recorded history. So April's a time of the year where especially the wheat and the corn crops are trying to get established, the seedlings are trying to get established, and it put a lot of stress on those early planted crops. We also saw a late season freeze and some hailstorms early. This was prior to the dry bean crop being planted, but those problems caused growers to have to take time away from planting dry beans to replant those other crops. And so we saw a little bit of a delay in planting of dry beans to where they didn't get planted quite as early as they would have otherwise. We did see some increased insect and weed pressure this year. That was exacerbated by the drought. And but as Martin was saying in the previous presentation, the growers did take the steps to spend the money and take care of those problems and still deliver a high quality crop at harvest. We did not see any widespread hail events on the dry bean crop after it was planted. There were some small events, but nothing that really hit the entire area. And we had some delayed irrigation that caused some delayed maturity, but our late fall and nice weather throughout harvest really helped us to get all of those fields to harvest and to maturity without any problems. You can see the pictures there at the bottom were just some of the photos of some wind stress and drought stress to the crop throughout the year. So this is a map of the ranking of precipitation through recorded history. So basically 1 would be the wettest year on record and 130 would be the driest year on record. And I put a circle there around where most of the production is for the Rocky Mountain region. And you can see that the Panhandle of Nebraska had the 91st driest year. The southwestern corner of Nebraska was 118th driest. Northeastern Colorado was 87th, and then southeastern Wyoming was 96th. So very, very dry. And this was from the end of February through the end of September. So that's basically the period of time where you would get moisture to grow that year's crop. I also pulled the map there that shows the month of August, and that shows you that it was the second driest August ever for Nebraska. This map is the same type of map, but it shows temperature. And this is from the 1st of June through the end of September. And that's also the time period where you're growing your dry beans. And so this shows you, obviously, the whole western part of the United States was very hot, including that same area where I had circled on the previous slide. The 6th hottest year in Panhandle of Nebraska, the hottest year in northeastern Colorado, and so forth. So that just kind of highlights that information there. So moving into the details on harvest in 2022, I would say our yields in Nebraska were disappointing. I don't think, they were all over the board. As you can see in those top two pictures on the left, we just had really, extremes when it came to field conditions. You had, depending on when that grower could access his irrigation water and water those fields, and depending on what the rotation was from the previous crop, fields following sugar beets were especially stressed because those sugar beets grow farther into the fall and take more water out of the soil. So it was just harder to get them watered successfully and established successfully. So disappointing yields in Nebraska. So I think they are going to be maybe slightly lower than what the USDA is predicting from what I can see. And I'd say average in Colorado and Wyoming. Quality was good to excellent. I'd say mostly excellent. Just that seed size may be a little bit variable on some of the fields that had some irrigation issues. We had warm and dry conditions through harvest. So harvest conditions were fantastic. We couldn't have asked for nicer weather. I mean, we had 70 and 80 degrees clear through the end of October. I think it was like 80 degrees on Halloween this year. So couldn't have asked for a better fall for everyone to get all the crops out of the field. We did have an extended harvest because of the delayed maturity, whether that was from them being delayed from planting or delayed from irrigating. And when looking at our stocks going into harvest, they were very manageable, except for what I mentioned on the Great Northerns. Transportation, as you've heard from the other presenters, continues to be a challenge. And I would just suggest that you work through that with whoever you're purchasing from to get those details determined before you make those purchases to get everything lined out. So in an outlook for 2023, I think the prices must remain strong to compete with acres. Dry beans are a great rotational crop in this area, so some producers are going to stick with them no matter what. But a lot of these producers here are livestock producers as well. And so strong grain and feed prices are definitely a factor, and growers are already able to lock in pricing for next year's production, whether that's grain prices, but other producers can lock in silage pricing with dairies because they base that upon the futures grain markets. Irrigation water availability is important, as well as input costs. I know some suppliers are allowing producers to pre-book, prepay, and secure fertilizer for next year, while others are not even putting out pricing yet. So there's a lot of uncertainty there. And I know, as Mitch mentioned, pest control options, that's a challenge because there are only certain products that are available for dry beans, and sometimes those are in short supply. You can see the soil moisture map there at the bottom. That's from the end of October. So I know some of those northern areas have gotten some snow since then, so that may have changed some, but you can see a lot of our areas are still just in dire need of some winter moisture. So we're hoping for that. And thank you all again. It's great to be here today.
Thank you so much, Courtney. Yeah, you can really hear how our growers are really battling with climate challenges. And I think that is something that, again, that's happening worldwide. And it's really interesting. Courtney was talking about the drought and what they've had to deal with in Nebraska and the Rocky Mountain region, but still, despite all that, produced an excellent quality crop, which is very good and very encouraging to hear. So with Courtney's remarks, that concludes our panel for today. And so I would like to now open or address your questions and answers. I see that there are a few waiting in the Q&A, and so I'm going to go there. And I also just want to note that a few of you have put in your comments that you want to see copies of the slides, and we'll make sure to follow up with that. Either we'll get it to you or it'll come through your local rep in your respective region or country. So yes, those will be available. All right, our first question. The question is about garbanzos. Garbanzos, the question is, garbanzos didn't have a great yield this year in the US overall, question mark? I guess I'll turn that to Martin.
Actually, I don't have the answer for that. Trying to think, I don't think I have heard any, heard what our report is for California for garbanzos. No, actually, that's unknown for me at this time. I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah, we can follow up. If anybody else has any info, feel free to weigh in on our panel. Otherwise, we can certainly follow up. I have the gentleman's name who asked that question, and we can
Sure.
get back with some quality info. Okay, our next question is, what does the panel think about imports from Mexico, and what are they hearing about Mexico's production? I'll just throw it out to all of you, whoever wants to take that.
I might take a really general shot at that one. Haven't heard a lot about imports from Mexico coming into the US. That's the question, right? At least not yet this year. I think our as Mitch noticed, our pinto bean price is a little bit cheaper than it was a year ago. I think things look a little bit different from a production standpoint than they did a year ago, especially with that bigger crop in North Dakota. So not really sure how big a deal that is. The other piece that weighs in on that, of course, is currency. So a lot of different dynamics this year as compared to last year. So I'm really not sure yet how big a deal that's going to be this year.
And then there was the other question was, what are we hearing about Mexico's production, which I could add some comments, but I think I'd rather, if you guys want to add anything before I say anything, please go ahead.
I think there's some expertise on the webinar today that probably knows a lot more about Mexican production than I do or we do right now. But you know, everything that we hear and read says that there was a little bit of a shift in planted acreage between classes. There's been some concern about dry weather and wet weather and back and forth. So we're kind of anxious to learn more about that, to be honest, in terms of what that production really looks like coming out of Mexico.
Yeah, and I was just going to add that we do have, of course, we have an office and a rep in Mexico, Raul Caballero, and so he, I think, will probably have more insight on that. We just produced we do produce reports on Mexico's production, and since I'm not an expert, I'll just note that we do have those reports available, and I would encourage you to reach out to Raul. Or even myself afterwards, and we can provide you some information on that.
Rebecca, if I could interrupt for just a second, I just got a text from one of our California warehouses, and going back to the garbanzo question, production appears to be down about 15% this last growing season.
Okay, and that's from just California, or
yes, yeah.
California. Okay, thank you. So that's an answer to that. Maybe one question I might ask of all the panelists is, we talk a lot about the issue of sustainability, and you've all kind of touched on it in your presentations. Does any of you want to just maybe say one simple thing about why we are so proud of the sustainability of US dry beans, and why we continue to talk about that?
Mitch, that's all you.
Yeah, I think from our standpoint, it's getting best management practices on the ground and in our farms, and our farmers are taking to the practices as they're educated about them and learning about them. So we're seeing more and more of on the ground in the form of best management practices that makes our beans better.
I think I would add to that, you know, when you combine that short growing season, the amount of water that's required to produce a crop, and Courtney, I certainly feel for that situation your growers are going through with the lack of water out there. But when you combine that short growing season, the overall water need, the low fertility that dry beans require, the nitrogen fixing aspect of dry beans. We do have a great story to tell. When you combine that with the health benefits, I don't know what's better out there. I can't think of another crop that has a better sustainability story to tell than our beans. So we're pretty proud of that. We just need to dress that up and talk about it a lot more than we do.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, beans were sustainable before sustainable was
Yeah.
before sustainable was a thing, I guess. Before it was, so no, it's really important for our producers, and it's, I mean, you have to have that rotation in order to help with all of the, irrigation challenges and pest challenges, and we're right now just trying to figure out if there's even some ways to improve the rotations that we're using, or irrigation methods we're using, or what we can do to try to continue to do the things we're doing out here. Because it's just, until this weather pattern changes, it's tough. I looked up the definition of a desert yesterday, and it's any place that receives less than 10 inches in a year. And right now, this whole panhandle of Nebraska, the southern panhandle, is all less than 10 inches for this year. I guess we have a month and a half to get out of a desert, but
Crazy.
I would agree with everything that was said about sustainability. I know growing black ice with as Joe said about fixing its own nitrogen. It's such an easy crop to grow. I mean, yeah, there are weather issues you have to watch out for, but the fertilizer requirements are minimal. And we work real closely with the University of California, a couple sites with their breeders who do just an excellent job taking care of us. We're always looking for varieties varieties that will produce better, that will be more drought resistant, that will be resistant to ligas, to aphids, to mites, and we're trying to be such good stewards. We're using less and less materials. We're using less fertilizer. The beans provide their own. So it's we're absolutely right. We've got a great story to tell. We need to tell it more.
I think in Michigan, we are doing some amazing things with cover crops. So we're able to hold soil in place, prevent erosion, protect our waterways. Growers have really latched on to the benefits of cover crops from a green manure source as well. So again, we do have a great story to tell, and we need to be a little louder about that probably.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys all for those comments. I think there's a lot we could put together a whole other webinar on that, which we probably should think about doing at some point. We have a few more questions on the Q&A, so I want to get to those. Here's another one. Because of the high yields on the pintos, when do we see the market firming up? Until now, we've only seen more aggressive offers as days go on.
Yeah, I think we're gonna see pricing. We're already seeing it drop a little bit. And I think we'll probably see more of that, where we're gonna get movement in the market then. And that'll change things and scenario wise, I think, for our bean dealers here.
Okay, thank you, Mitch. And one more question. I guess this will go to Joe. There's been an increase in exports from Michigan shipping through Canadian ports due to better throughput than US ports. How do you see this situation going forward?
I think that a lot of our exports, especially going east, have always gone through, in particular, Montreal. So if we're seeing an increase, that's great news. And part of that hopefully is due to the removal of the retaliatory tariffs that were in place that sort of slowed us down for a few years. So I think that's a common path for us, especially going east. So I think that will continue. Those lanes have always been pretty sort of standard for us, if that makes sense.
Makes sense. Well, that's the last question on our Q&A, and we're at the top of the hour. So with that, I'm going to conclude this webinar. I want to thank all of our panelists and experts for their remarks. I thought this was really insightful, and I always learn something new whenever we do these webinars. So I hope for all of our listeners and participants and global customers that this was useful and helpful. Again, we appreciate your time. We did record today's event. We will be able to share the slides with you as well. So feel free to reach out to me or to your local representative. But we have your information and we will make sure to share. With that said, on behalf of the U.S. Dry Bean Council, thank you very much. Thank you for buying U.S. Dry Beans. And that concludes our webinar. Have a fantastic day, everybody. Thank you.